Welcome back, Hawks fans, to another episode of the Hawks Nest podcast. This time we're here with the official scorer for the Boise Hawks, Curtis Haines, who takes care of all the decisions up in the press box, and I have the luxury of sitting next to. So I'm very excited that you have decided to come on and join me, and we get to talk a little bit more.
Oh, hey, no problem. I love talking baseball or whatever.
So my first question for you, Curtis, is you've been with the Hawks for a long time. When did you start, and how did you get into kind of working with the Boise Hawks?
I started in 2006, and I was looking for something to do in the summer, a summer job, because I had summers off. I'm in education, so I have summers off. And they had a job fair, and they were asking for an official scorer. And I've done some scoring in basketball over the years, and I was like, that sounds like fun. Go watch baseball, do some scoring. And their interview questions were interesting. They were like, how would you handle managers yelling at you? And I coached basketball for 30 years, and I'm like, I can handle anybody yelling at me. That's not a big deal, So I answered and told them, hey, officials yell at me all the time. I'm good to go. They were like, perfect. You can have the job, and it's been a great gig. I've enjoyed it ever since. I mean, you get to watch baseball, and there's nothing better than doing that in the summertime.
Right, yeah, you have the opportunity to basically sit up in the press box. You get one of the best views at the stadium, and you get to take care of making all the decisions. And there's a lot of people still at Hawks games who keep their own books.
Oh yeah. No, we have a number of fans. There's a couple that sit right down below the main press box who've been there for, I would say 10 years. They have season tickets, and I stop by and say hi to them all the time. We used to put on. For those who wanted, once a year, I'd put on a little tutorial for them. If they wanted to come in, I'd sit down and walk them through how we do scoring and all that stuff. And we used to get, not a huge turnout, but we'd get 10 to 20 people who'd show up.
Basically a scorekeeping clinic, yes?
Yeah.
So for maybe the fans that aren't so in tune with, scorekeeping, official scoring, how difficult is it, I guess, and how much barrier to entry really is there?
Well, for the most part, it's pretty simple stuff. I mean, most plays in baseballs are pretty straightforward. You see what happens. A single's a single, a double's a double. But there are some judgment calls you have to make, and there's some weird – baseball's a weird sport, so sometimes there's weird plays that pop up that now you have to make a call on. Like normally you don't give errors for foul balls that are missed. But on occasion, the rules say you can give an error for a foul ball. And we had a situation, I can't remember what year it was, but, it was a routine play off of first base. The first baseman had to take 2 steps over. High pop fly, easy catch, and he lost it in the sun, hit his glove, and he dropped it. Well, that would have cost a no-hitter for the pitcher. If we, if that's not an error, so we had to rule it an error. And I didn't mind doing that. Sometimes you want to do those things to save what's going on the field.
Right. And your decisions affect things in a lot of different ways, although it may, you're not the one out there playing the game, but how you decide to rule maybe a hit or an error can affect someone's average or a pitcher's ERA.
Oh, big time, especially, when you're affiliated with a major league club and those guys are looking to move up. Their stats matter, and it's big time to them. And I've always been of the opinion, I'll go with whatever the manager wants to do. I don't have an ego to bruise. I'm not going to stand firm and say, no, that's a hit. We're not going to change anything. If they want to change it for whatever reason, I'm game. Those kids, they're trying to make the big time, and that stuff matters to them.
Right, they're out there trying their hardest every day, and what maybe you see in one situation, the manager who's down on the field may see it differently. The hitting coach may see it differently. The player may see it differently. I mean, there's no one right or wrong opinion. It's just You are the official scorer, so what you say goes until maybe the manager decides he wants to chat.
Right, and they have a wealth of experience more so than I do in some of those situations. Sometimes on fielding errors especially, the rule book states an error is something that's not a routine play. But what's your definition of a routine play? A hard ground ball that takes a crazy spin, off the dirt or off a little pebble that might be in there, and all of a sudden the third baseman can't handle it now. So is that an error, or is that no longer a routine play?
Right, and the definition also changes. Well, the definition doesn't technically change in the rule book, but as you go up levels from high school to college to
Yep.
low A to double A to triple A to major leagues, at every level there's different official scorers who all read and interpret the game differently, but also you expect more of the players the more they move up, and things that maybe would have been a hit at 3 levels ago, now is an error.
Sure, totally. And some of it's, I think, ability of players. You get so used to a shortstop who can go deep into the hole and grab a ball, throw it over the first, no problem, that all of a sudden he doesn't make that play, and you're like, well, what do we call that? He makes that play every day, And the biggest thing is I try and be consistent. You don't want an error. You don't want it to be an error for one guy and a hit for another guy. You want to try and be consistent on what you do.
Right. And so now that we've got the scorekeeping talk out of the way, we can kind of shift back to the Boise Hawks. And you mentioned you've been there since 2006, so you've seen a lot of different types of Boise Hawks. You've seen their affiliation with the Cubs, their affiliation with the Rockies, now back to independent baseball, back to their roots. Kind of, what has it been like for you going through the shifts and while also remaining in your position?
It's been fun to see some of those guys who have made the pros, come through. The Cubs put a premium on their number 1 players or their number 2 players coming through Boise. So you got to see them for at least a little bit. The Rockies did some of that, but they also skipped sometimes, so you didn't get to see all the quality guys. But you saw a few. How the different clubs handled their minor league system is interesting. The Cubs tried to keep groups of players together as they moved up the ladder, whereas the Rockies had no problem just mixing and matching and elevating people, mid-season. The Cubs tried not to do that as much as possible. They tried to keep somebody where you were. But, the dictates of the big club mattered. I remember one year the Cubs went through, at the major league level, they went through an injury stretch. So, of course, now they're calling up guys from AAA, and that affects everything down the ladder. Now the guys from AA are going up to AAA, and guys from single A are going to AA. We had a couple pitchers and a catcher, I think, go to AAA for like 2 weeks. So they got a little taste of the level a little bit higher, and then they came back down. So sometimes you see that. And I think that's fun for the players, and it's certainly fun for the fans to see guys like Kyle Schwarber came through town with the Cubs. And you knew he wasn't going to be here long. You can just kind of tell with those type of players. But it was fun for the fans to see him a little bit and see what that kind of talent is like.
Players like Wilson Contreras, Josh Donald, Sinclair Torres, there have been a bunch
of
yes. Big league. I mean, how many of those guys do you kind of remember? I mean, most of them, I'm sure, but are there any, stories or particular encounters that you've ever had with any of them that kind of stick out in your mind?
Oh, I've had, the biggest one was, I'm not going to name the player because he's up in the majors, but he was on a home run chase in the league, fighting for the league record, and we had an incident where, and this is where scoring comes into play, he hit a deep fly ball to center field, and it came off the center fielder's glove, and then he inadvertently kicked it. So now I called it an error. The runner made it all the way home. It was an inside the park scoring deal. He wanted me to rule that a home run because that would have given him the league lead in home runs, and he was very passionate about it. And I was like, man, I just can't do that. I mean, it was a fairly routine fly ball. It just went off the foot of the center fielder. And, boy, he got heated about it. He's passionate about what he's doing. He's trying to make the big leagues. I got it, but I refused to budge. And it was all good the next day. He came up and apologized, and we were okay. But in hindsight, that's a funny story. At the time, though, it was pretty intense. And but those kind of things happen once in a while. Most of the time, most of those guys are pretty good. Most of the coaches do a good job of telling them, hey, you don't worry about that. You worry about your play on the field.
That's really the idea behind the whole thing is don't worry about the stats. Obviously, the stats are important, and that's maybe what gets you called up. But if there's someone in the stands there to watch you and decide whether or not you're going to go up to the next level, if he sees you smoke 4 balls and get 4 outs, but then you reach on a little dinky single, he's not going to care much about your batting average. He's going to be like, oh, this guy put 4 really good swings on a baseball.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why some of the arguments and things are kind of irrelevant in the grand scheme of things.
Yep, they are. But I'll tell you, the neatest thing is just kind of getting to know the players. they're just like everybody else. Some are really quiet in the locker room. Some are very outgoing. Josh Donaldson was very outgoing. He wanted to know everybody, and he was gregarious, and I enjoyed his time here. He was a fierce competitor, so he was fun, and he stuck up for – at the time he was a catcher. As he came up through the Cubs organization, he started as a catcher, and he was fiercely protective of his pitchers. He knew I was the official scorer, so he'd jokingly give me crap sometimes. He goes, I don't know, that should have been an error on the shortstop. It shouldn't go against the pitcher. And he laughed, but he always had their back. He was a really good teammate.
Based on my conversations with the 2021 team, now that we're independent, they're also fiercely competitive. They're here for a reason. They want to move up as well, and they care about things like that as well. They're very protective of their players and looking out for what's best for their team, which obviously for you as the official scorer means maybe some questioning on whether or not it was a hit or an error. But as we mentioned, that's your discretion and Gary Vantall, the manager's discretion.
Yep, and I talk with Gary almost after every game, and we sit down, and I know there's when I make a decision up in the press box, there's certain plays I'm like, well, that may be something we're going to end up changing, at the end of the game after I talk with everybody involved. And we've had a couple of those this year where I've called it a hit or I've called it an error and gone down and talked to Gary, and he has a better view or a better angle than I do sometimes because we're so high up there, and he'll say, no, that was a pretty routine catch he should have made. You should give him an error instead of a hit, and I'm like, okay, no problem.
So with you being around baseball for a long time, I know you've seen a lot of things. What's your best baseball memory here in Boise?
Boy, in Boise, the years where we were in the hunt and running for titles are a lot of fun. And we were in that situation a number of times, especially with the Cubs. And we had kind of been spoiled. If you go back earlier, the Angels won like 4 or 5 Northwest titles here. And then the Cubs won one 2 years before I became the scorer. They had won the title. And those years are a lot of fun, when you're in first place or hunting first place and you make the playoffs. Those years are a little bit more intense. So all of those years are fun. There have been some individual games that have been real interesting. As a fan, I was involved with a game that went 21 innings, I think. And they made the last out, and the sprinklers came on because it was like 1 a.m. and it was like almost perfect timing. You're like, wow, that's crazy. I saw a game where the Hawks were down by 12, like in the 7th inning. And everybody thought, oh, this game's over. The fans just started to clear out. And the Hawks came back and won that game. We scored 13 runs in the last 3 innings. It was crazy.
Yeah, you see some incredible things when you're around baseball for a long time. And lastly, Curtis, my final question for you is, are you going to be doing another official scoring clinic again, get the people back into keeping book at the game? Because I know it's a dying art, really. There, as you mentioned, there's a couple people who do it, but it used to be commonplace for everyone in the stadium to fill out a lineup card, and we have them in the game programs with both sides.
You know what? I would love to do that. If they had enough interest, if enough people wanted to know how to do that, and we wanted to do that again, I would gladly do that. We've also done that, for like Little League teams before, people who've never kept score. They're volunteering to keep score. I've sat down and talked with them, too, and just kind of showed them the basics, and I would gladly do that anytime.
It's unfortunate that book is dying out with all the technology and online box scores, but there's something about opening up a book from maybe a couple years ago and being like, wow, looking at the names and seeing what happened.
No doubt about it, especially when you think about who's come through the Hawks organization. I mean, we had Dontrell Willis here, for a while, and of course at the time nobody thought he was going to be a Cy Young winner, but he had some stuff. You could tell he was probably going to make the majors. But, you go back and just read the names, and you're like, wow, now look what that guy's doing. Josh Donaldson won the MVP a couple years ago. It's just been really cool to see the players who've come through who've made the majors. And you can say, hey, I remember that kid when he was 20 years old. He spent a summer in Boise.
Awesome. Well, Curtis, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you coming and joining me to do this, and love talking official scoring with you.
Oh, you bet. Anytime, my man.